This would, in any other world, you'd think, Alan, this would just be sort of a very bad, dark sitcom playing out here with multiple governments all trying different initiatives. And here's an idea. This one's called Rwanda. Here's another idea. This one's smashing the gangs. Here's a better idea. Let's throw 10 squillion quid to the French. They'll sort it. And on it goes. And we find ourselves back here time and time again discussing the same problem without anybody getting even close to solving the issue.
Well, yes, I mean, there's a bit of merry-go-round, isn't it? But
Yeah.
I think part of the problem there is that we're not really seeing joined-up action to focus on the problem. The problem is that, you know, migrants are coming from places far away from this country to this country. Now, to get to us, they have to cross numerous other countries. They have to, you know, go across land, they have to go across sea, maybe even twice the sea, depending on how they're coming along. And clearly, we're not the only ones facing this problem. We have many other countries near us who have similar situations. So the one thing, Ian, that hasn't really been tried is working together to resolve this collectively, because guess what? We're all in it together.
Yeah, that's true. How would that look, working together? Who do we need to be working with?
So let's go through the chain. To get to us, they have to come through Europe. So we've got to work with Europe to stop the chain from reaching us. Now, Europe itself will go, well, hang on, we've got the same problem. We need to stop them reaching us. So then we go to the next stage of the chain. That's either going to be the Balkans route, or it's going to be across the Med, and focusing on the countries on the other side of that, saying, right, what are you going to do to help us, or how are we going to convince you to help us to stop this flow? Yeah. And then those countries are going, well, hang on, we're getting the flow from somewhere else. So how does everyone work together to stop it at source? And so by taking a methodical approach down this, we're going to have a way of, I think at least, working out a common pattern with our neighbours and further afield to stop the migrants ever getting here, and to keep them gainfully employed, frankly, in their home countries.
I would imagine that throwing a couple of million quid in Iraq or Vietnam is not likely to really touch the sides on this one, Alan.
Well, here's the thing, though. We're not talking about a couple of million quid, are we? If we look at the capabilities of the European Union, for example, a collective block of very advanced economies, we've got way more money that can be spent on this in terms of analysing how we can actually look at this. And I hate to say it's about money, but ultimately, what other options do you have? Yes, we can reinforce, and we should be reinforcing our external borders, making sure that people who come across can't just walk in and there's a whole process there. But if you're serious about stopping the supply side, you've got to go to source, haven't you? You've got to sort of find a way to convince people their lives are better off where they are, rather than taking a leap into the dark and coming over here.
Is there another reality at play here? And I don't think this gets talked about often enough. Look, we're just in the human journey has arrived at a point where the world is a whole lot smaller. Doing things that seemed unbelievable 20 years ago for individuals is now very doable. The idea that if you live in Sudan that you would think of even walking or crossing and getting to northern France in order to get to England would have been unthinkable 20 years ago. Now, you know, you've only got to look at a TikTok video and you can realise, actually, this is really doable. So things have changed. Appetites have changed. People's resilience on what they are willing to do has changed. And that's not really factored in here as much, I sense, because maybe, particularly under a Labour government, Alan, it feels as if you're not understanding hardship or vulnerability, when in fact, you might just be talking about a lot of people who just fancy changing their life.
And indeed, that's clearly a big part of it, Ian. I mean, the whole point is that in today's world, people are able to go, you know, look at their phones, and, you know, these phones are ubiquitous all around the world, they're smartphones, and say, you know what, this looks a lot better over there than what I've got over here. And so, like I said, there are two things that need to change in order to alter that equation. The first is that they see videos of how impossible it is to get into here, or what happens to them if they do come here and they're illegitimate, and, you know, they are then sent to a far worse outcome than how they just stayed where they are. And secondly, you've got to raise the capabilities and expectations in the home country to go, actually, that gap is closing. I'm not, you know, I'm less interested in moving, because moving means I leave everything behind, my whole life, my whole connections, everything that way. If there's a way that I can see prosperity emerging locally, and they've shut the door at the other side, am I really going to make the journey? That's about changing the decision-making calculus. You're quite right to point that out.
In terms of, you know, timelines and the like, we've had this story rumbling around for the last 5-7 years. I'm talking about the Channel migrant crossing issue. It's clearly big, whatever way you look at it, in terms of numbers, the knock-on effect, where people live, the backstory, the amount it is costing. Is there a simpler way? I mean, everything you just said makes perfect sense, but there's a big appetite to just stop the boats.
Well, if only we could just stop the boats. I mean, you and I know we could stop the boats, but we're not prepared to stop the boats because, well, they've been breach of all sorts of laws. So unless you're going to change the legal framework or are prepared to say these laws are just not fit for purpose and we're going to do what we want, we're not going to stop the boats, are we? That's a reality. We're going to have to work with other people to stop the boats, which means not getting people onto the boats in the first place rather than stopping them in the sea.
But what happens, Alan? Sorry to interject. What happens, though, literally, if the Navy or some other force was able to be out there in the Channel? You see the boat coming towards you. It's got 16 young men on it. You intervene, you stop it. It might be perilous to do this, which is the excuse we constantly hear, and you turn it back. And you turn it back under the threat of, multiple arrest or whatever. These are armed military units that will stop the boats. And so what would be the upshot of us trying that?
Well, I'm sure a whole raft of human rights groups in this country would immediately sue the government. That's what would happen.
But for what? For stopping illegal people coming into the country illegally?
Correct, but they will say it was done in a dangerous way and this breaches their human rights, and there's a whole set of conventions we've signed up to under the ECHR, and it will go to a court, and the politically biased judges will then go and agree and say there's a case, and then we'll be in all sorts of kind of bad legal territory.
Does it matter, though?
The choice then comes down to it comes down to
Keir Starmer's not going to jail, is he, for that?
Keir Starmer's not going to go to jail, but I can't imagine that Keir Starmer is going to say, I'm not going to listen to this court, being embarrassed himself. He's not going to do that, is he? So ultimately, it's a choice. But then again, I've got to be fair here, neither did previous Conservative governments.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, these very same narratives, it grew under the Conservatives, it got worse, they came up with Rwanda. We'll never know whether that would have made a difference, although the smart money says the numbers, if the Conservatives had got back in, the numbers that would have gone to Rwanda would have been so small, and it would have been snail's pace removal that we'd have hardly noticed it.
Exactly, and that's the problem with the Rwanda scheme. Whatever one thought of it, I mean, it was clearly designed to be a deterrent effect as opposed to something that was going to practically move the needle in terms of numbers. The idea was people would be scared. You might, your lottery number might come up, you'll be on the flight, and that'd be that. But I agree, it wasn't really a solution, and we're still struggling to do that. I want to highlight one quick thing for you, though. I've been very interested to see that there have been a couple of European countries, Germany most significantly, who've reimposed border controls because of migration crisis as far as they're concerned. Now, it's a temporary thing. It may not go on beyond early next year, but I think it's significant that for the first time, major European countries have gone, this open borders lark, it's not all what it's cracked up to be, and we've got bigger problems here than freedom of movement.
And particularly Germany, of course, of all countries, that was the sort of bastion of, our doors are open, in you come under Merkel. We remember that, huge influx of people. How are they able to do this? What are they invoking, or what are they avoiding, or what are they what policy are they using? Because the European rules of people moving around are quite obvious for all to see. How are they getting through this?
So interestingly, the Schengen provisions do allow for an emergency break. They allow for a country, if it feels there's some kind of emergency, that it can actually do a temporary break. Now, it can't do it permanently. And the question, of course, is going to be for Germany, what happens when the break runs out? What are you going to do then? Are you going to continue it? Are you going to essentially say, we're not going to keep to this Schengen rule and we're just going to move forward? I mean, don't forget the Germans have a very interesting election coming up in February. I can't imagine many parties campaigning to open the borders again necessarily. But then it comes down to the following, doesn't it, Ian, which is that the continental Europeans have always understood that when it comes to EU or other European deals, they can break the laws and they don't particularly care about it. So we never understood that. When we were in the EU, we were the only idiots who thought, we've got to obey every single rule and regulation. Banana has to be, it can't be curved, it can't be curved in that sort of way. The Europeans break the rules all the time, and they wait for a long legal process that gets knocked out ultimately, and they get their way. And I suspect that if enough European countries decide they want to reimpose border controls, it won't matter what on earth is said in a treaty, they'll do it anyway.
Yeah, indeed. Alan, thank you.